Depending on the state, you actually might have to work for an additional amount of years where you're not exactly licensed yet, and so you're still technically not a licensed psychologist because you have to complete all of the hours for the state. What's up, fam? Welcome back to the channel. If it's your first time here, welcome. My name is Phil Sarpon. This is Phil's Guide to PsyD. This channel is dedicated to all things clinical psychology. If you're interested in psychology, wellness, or even if you want a little bit of a sneak preview into what grad school might look like for you, then this is the channel for you. So today's a very important video. I'm going to be talking about the reasons to not go into clinical psychology school. Now, some of you may be looking at me like, wait, what? Because I'm in clinical psychology currently right now, but honestly, I'm doing this video because I want people to really think about the cons and sort of the adverse things, the negative things that could be associated with clinical psychology. And so I really want people to do their work and their due diligence in researching and making sure that clinical psychology is truly going to be for them. All right, so with that, let's get this video started. I'm gonna start with number one. One of the reasons that you should not go into a PsyD is because of time. So time is huge. As you guys know, time is important. Hopefully when you're thinking about clinical psychology school, you're thinking about all the time and all the years that you're going to have to put in for school. With PhD, it's about 6 to 7 years, and with a PsyD, it's about 4 to 6 years. Now, for just my clinical psychology program alone, not only am I doing 4 years of school, I also have to do a 1-year internship. Depending on the state, you actually might have to work for an additional amount of years where you're not exactly licensed yet, and so you're still technically not a licensed psychologist because you have to complete all of the hours for the state. So just to kind of break it down, in clinical psychology school, we have to get a certain number of hours of clinical work, whether it's therapy or psychological assessment. And once we're done with school, again, we have that 1-year internship. That 1-year internship does not mean that we are licensed clinical psychologists yet, because usually most people will have to do a postdoc. A postdoc is basically where you're still working under the supervision of another licensed psychologist, and you're fulfilling all the hours that you need for the state requirements to become a licensed psychologist. And so honestly, for people, when they look at it from the beginning to the end, you're looking at potentially 4 years of school, the 1 year of internship, and then another 2 years where you might be in a postdoc, fulfilling all the hours that you need in order to actually take your licensure exam and become licensed in that state. And so that is a significant amount of time, because when you really think about it, that's actually more than the length of half a decade. That's almost a full decade. That's 7 years where you are in school. I say that not to scare anybody off, but I do think it's really important to think about as you go into clinical psychology school and perhaps applying to clinical psychology. The second reason to not get a PsyD is that it is super, super expensive. Now, with PhDs, usually they do cover you for a stipend. With PsyDs, most PsyD programs, you're going to have to pay it all out of pocket or take out student loans to pay for your tuition. This part actually really, really sucks, because if you are someone that wants to go into clinical psychology to help underserved populations or to help people that are in need, it's really hard to do that because you're going to have to pay off those student loans. And in order to pay off those student loans, you actually have to get a decent job. And so for a number of people, they have that conflict between themselves because they want to work in underserved populations, but those underserved populations may not pay as well as some other population or some other site or clinical site. And so it's really important to kind of weigh the pros and cons between getting a PsyD versus trying to go into a PhD. Now, here's the thing. I personally am super happy that I am in a PsyD because I feel like I get way more experience with the clinical work, and I get, honestly, as much as I don't mind research, I'm way more focused on the individual, on couples, on families, on children, all of those things in terms of my clinical work. So I'm really, really passionate about that, which is why I chose the PsyD. But it is important to understand that it does come at a cost because PsyD programs can be super, super expensive. So that is another reason to potentially not go into a PsyD. The third reason to not go into a PsyD is that you might be able to do the same amount of work doing some other type of field. Here's what I mean by that. With clinical psychologists, if you want to be a therapist and do mostly therapy as a clinical psychologist, it's really important to weigh the pros and cons of being a psychologist, because honestly, there are so many other fields that you could be a therapist with way less school, with way less student loans, and in way less time. And so, for example, things like getting a master's in social work or a master's in family therapy, or even just becoming a licensed professional counselor, where you have to go through 2 years of a master's program and then maybe another 2 years getting your clinical hours, but you get done with school way faster, and then also you're way less in debt in terms of student loans. And so that's really something to think about. If you primarily just want to focus on therapy, there are other fields that you can go into to become a therapist. And here's the other thing. A lot of times a licensed clinical social worker that goes into private practice, not only can they make their own hours, but they can also make their own wages. And so sometimes if they wanted to, they could actually basically make clients or patients pay them the same amount as a psychologist. So they could actually make just as much money as a psychologist doing therapy, because at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you go to a psychologist or go to a licensed professional counselor or a licensed marriage family therapist for therapy, because they all are basically going to have the same type of education and experience when it comes to doing therapy. The big difference between psychologists and therapists is that they have the research component side that really sets them apart. And so they can really do more of the teaching, more of the doctoral research and things like that. But when it comes to therapists, it really is more so just going to be based on the individual and the best fit for them in terms of what type of therapist they want to go to. And so that's the thing, guys. If you are wanting to just do therapy, I would strongly recommend just looking at other fields, because there are other fields that may have a little bit of an easier path to become a therapist than going through 4 to 6 to 7 years of psychology school, paying off all the student loans, and then actually finally becoming a therapist. Whereas you have to do all of the other additional things of psychological assessments and also research to also become a psychologist, where maybe in a therapy program or a counseling program, you can just focus on therapy. I'm not giving you guys any professional advice or anything like that. I'm just telling you that these are some things to think about when it comes to time of a clinical psychology program, when it comes to the cost, and it comes to basically other fields that may do similar things in a shorter amount of time. So you really have to do your homework and your research in terms of weighing out the pros and the benefits of getting a PsyD degree. Hopefully that helps, guys. If you guys have any questions, definitely put it down in the comment section below. If there was something that you feel like I missed in terms of people really thinking about whether or not they want to get a PsyD degree or not, definitely also put it down in the comment section below. I think that will provide a fruitful conversation for the community, as well as if you have not liked or subscribed to this video yet, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and I will see you guys in the next video.